next presenters are Todd Halamka and Travis Dewitz. They made a trip to China together in 2018 to see some of the last steam locomotives operating in regular service anywhere on the planet. Todd and Travis are both exceptionally gifted photographers. Todd's traveled all over the world with his architecture practice. This was the first trip abroad for Travis, so they had some really unique experiences on here and came away with some incredible images. And I'm really looking forward to asking them about their travels together and hearing a little bit more about their experiences. Why don't we go ahead and get started? Todd, Travis, why don't you just say a couple of words about what inspired you to go and some of your what that trip over was like, and then we'll get into actually being there.
Travis, go ahead.
Well, the trip started for me when Todd asked if I was interested in going to China, and it wasn't something that was on my radar, but he asked. I thought it over, and I finally agreed to it, and I'm glad I made the choice of doing it. It's a once in a lifetime opportunity to see real steam working real mines, and the access was amazing. So that's what it all started in. Todd's the mastermind behind the whole trip.
Well, Travis, you're very kind, but it was really a partnership together that, again, one of the aspects that CRPA offers are networking opportunities to reach out and learn about different parts of the world and the railroading there, and it was a portal in this case to a fascinating world, all revolving around a coal economy, the sights, the smells, the rugged beauty, sort of an otherworldly Martian-like landscape, as you'll see in the images, with seams of subsurface fires steaming into the sky, mixing with below-grade temperatures, with a methodical team of railroaders that have used steam-powered locomotives to lift coal to the surface in essentially an unchanged method since the mine opened in the 1950s.
Well, it sounds like an incredible adventure. Could you tell me just a little bit more about exactly where you were and what it took to get there?
I guess I'll start with that. So it would be like flying into New York City and then jumping on a plane and flying to like middle of Montana somewhere. We overnighted in Beijing, and then the next morning we flew out to Hami, which is, what do you think, Todd, like 60 miles or so from Sandling?
Yeah.
And we took taxi from the Hami airport to Sandling.
And so Sandling was the coal mine where you were actually photographing the steam locomotives. What were your first impressions of that area?
I feel that Sandling looks a lot like the Powder River Basin to me. Like it's not an exact replica, and it has like Todd says, like a Martian lunar landscape to it. To me, I've always made that connection of the Powder River Basin and Sandling being very similar, but very vastly different at the same time.
I think the other aspect that adds in from a landscape perspective, Scott, is that on clear days, which Travis and I experienced the whole range of sunny, crystal clear days in early February, the sort of coldest month there, to days where it was very overcast. But on the very clear days, you could see up the 15,000 plus peaks just north of us as you head beyond the mine and sort of the high desert plain that the mine sits at.
And then the difference, especially on the western side of China, is the security is much higher. The most interesting point for me was the gas stations are like fortified, surrounded by barbed wire fence. Some have police, some don't. Some have like anti-tank, big steel, like X crossbeam things dotted around the station. You could watch the officers going around like with a mirror looking underneath the one or two cars that can go in at a time. A couple had canine dogs sniffing the cars, so that was pretty eye-opening.
What was a typical day like once you actually got there and got set up and were going out to photograph? What were your days like out photographing in the mine and on the railroad?
Travis and I seem to be wired very similarly in that we sleep very little and work day and night. So we established a pace of about 17 hours a day and night with short sleep in between for 2 weeks. Scott, we started each day 2 hours before light with the pre-dawn crew change in the staging tracks adjacent to the railroad workers' apartments. Consisting of two 12-hour shifts of 3 railroad men per train set, each train set would first descend down to the mine to fill their tenders and then pick up a trainload of coal and bring it up to the transfer conveyors called the washery that move the loads from steam-powered Mikados to the diesel cross-country train sets. A typical run down to the mine and back was between 1 and 2 hours, with plus minus 6 runs per crew shift. Typical division of labor had 2 men in the locomotive cab, with the third manning the tail end, guiding the train tail first down to the loader. The head end steam locomotive would then pull the loaded train back up out of the mine, a slow climb of several miles to the transfer conveyors. After each run, the 3 men would rotate positions within the locomotive and tail cab. Interestingly, all radio communication was accomplished via battery-powered little handheld walkie-talkies.
And Travis, could you just share some of your impressions about these 17-hour photography days?
They still weren't long enough. I wish I could have stayed out there longer, but yeah, that getting up in the morning, I mean, that was the best part. That I think that was our best meal of the day too. June would talk to the owners, and they actually opened up that restaurant early for us from their normal business hours so that we could get there, eat, and then still make it down to the station before light.
Fine.
So after leaving the restaurant, we like Todd said, you run down to the station, and I think for me that was probably the best part of the day for me. On my typical day was the pre-dawn, watching all the locomotives get ready, all the workers changing shifts. Man, to go there and see it again and smell that coal smoke in the air, that I'd give anything for that.
You know, adrenaline drove us, I think, for those 2 weeks, Travis, where you just forget about how damn cold it was.
Yeah, well, it was very cold, and especially those first few days, it was so cold that the trains would come back to the station, and the pipes were either frozen from during the day or froze up while they sat at the station before the crew change within an hour. So they were going by with torches and reheating up all the fittings and all the tubes to drain water and to fill the tenders with water. A lot of times the wells would freeze up as well.
So I mean, this is a large open pit coal mine and a pretty sprawling industrial railroad system that you were photographing. And you know, I mean, here in the U.S. it would be almost impossible without, you know, going through multiple channels of official clearance to be able to even approach something like that. And you said security was a priority there. So you know, what sort of access did you have to the railroad and the mine?
To the railroad property, we had free access. We walked pretty much anywhere that we wanted to. The washery, all the rail line, the stations. We could walk around. You could even kind of open doors and kind of peek in, walk in some places if you really wanted to. I know when Todd was at the washery, I think he had a guy that invited him to go like into the plant and look around, and yeah, they were very lax. The only places we couldn't just walk into was the shops area was by invite only. And then any of the stations, or not the stations, but like the interlocking buildings, they were all manned. So we would always ask permission to enter them. And then the blue loader, so that's like the pit area where the coal trains should be loaded up. Just, I don't know, a month before we were flying to China, June emailed us and told us that access to the blue loader was much more limited.
I think in the last few years, Scott, the railroad men and workers there, in the security folks have, as Travis is saying, become a little more laxed or used to, or conditioned might be the right term, for visitors. Because it is the last revenue steam railway in the world, it's very popular with Japanese railroad enthusiasts. And with that, even when we were there for the first 3-4 days of our 2 weeks, there were 2 different groups of Japanese enthusiasts that were visiting. And I think that, you know, again, the amount of visitors that they've had in the last half a dozen years has softened, I think, their view a little bit. In the same breath, I think they're a little wary of some of the folks that we saw getting kind of close to the tracks or the trains. So it's a double-edged sword. The other thing we had the pleasure of was a German railroad photographer. Our first 3 days joined us that had been with June on several previous trips. And, you know, his insights were, and we'll talk more about June in a little bit, but his insights were refreshing and also helpful in getting us sort of grounded and familiar with roughly the 12 to 14 miles of walking that we would do around the mine each day.
So, I mean, it sounds like you both had the chance to interact with a lot of workers on the railway and around the facilities, even, you know, the hotel where you were staying. Could you just say a little bit about what the Chinese people were like that you interacted with while you were there?
I think what Travis and I found was that even though there was a language barrier where neither we or they could speak hardly a word of each other's language, you communicate pretty much by eye and hand and have a general understanding of one another by eye contact and body contact, if you will. Some of the access that I think we had was really, again, from both June having done this for many years and his ability to open doors, be familiar to a lot of the railroaders. That trust that he's built over the years allowed us, I think, some of the extraordinary access that Travis pointed out earlier. They were generally very diligent, each of the workers very focused. Again, one of the things that I think I enjoyed the most as well is the morning ritual of the crew change, where even though they're working hard at below freezing temperatures and conditions that are rough, the smiles, the communication between them, the occasional conversation, the laughter that existed, I think showed that even though, you know, they're working these 2 12-hour shifts, they loved each other and they enjoyed their companionship.
I agree with that. It was everybody was amazing to deal with, and of course, like going to any place, some people didn't want to have their pictures taken, and some didn't care. No difference than if we went to around the United States anywhere. I had a couple cool experiences with how friendly they were. One was with one of the engineers. He was making some breakfast dumplings. He must have brought them from home, and then he set them up on the steam locomotive, and he was heating them up. And I was just walking by and asked to take a picture, and then he grabbed one of the dumplings off the steam locomotive that was super hot, and he handed it down to me and said, "Here, have it." I think that was the most authentic Chinese food that I had there, and it was great. It was amazing. The other moment was also food related. Was I was just walking by myself through town, and there's like these little mini markets going on, and one of the residents in the area was walking down. And he bought these bread things, like breadsticks, and he just handed me one and said, "Here, you can have that." So I returned the favor and gave him a candy bar, and it was a cool experience and cool to connect with somebody without being able to physically like talk to them, but you could just tell how friendly we were towards each other, and it was a great interaction.
Yeah, the other part that was fascinating to both of us was in a similar vein was that the ritual as they're waking up these iron giants was that they would dump a little bit of hot coal from the engine down onto the ground next to the engine, and set a teapot with water in it so that they would be warming their pre-dawn tea. And then by midday, when things had warmed up on the engine, you could see them for the midday break putting similarly, and you'll see these in some of the photographs, the teapots right on the side of the boiler on the engine warming. And then when we took the cab ride down inside there were all sorts of 2 or 3 typically in each cab, backup tea kettles just in case.
Yeah, I wanted to ask about the cab ride. How did that all come together?
Well, the cab ride was really high on our list of things that we wanted to do, and getting access was definitely a concern. And talking to June, he's like, he should be able to make it work. And when it came up to the day, we're like, so we asked June, and he's like, well, I'll just drop you off along the tracks, and when the train comes up and stops, just give them some cigarettes and candy bars and then climb up. And we're like, oh, can't you talk to them for us and kind of get this okayed? He's like, if I ask them, they will say no. So just act like you don't know what's going on and just get up and get in there. And that's what we did. We went up to the tracks after June dropped us off, and then he sped off and went across to another area to do some photos. And we just kind of started climbing up into the train, and we kind of looked for them to invite us, as at the same time we just kind of started climbing into it, and we handed off our goods. We bartered our way in, and the engineer was very excited that we were there, and he was like showing us on his phone videos of the steam trains and pictures. I don't know if he took them or if there's someone else's, but he's showing them all to us. And the fireman, I'm not sure if he was quite as excited that we're up there, and it's very tight quarters, and there's 4 of us in there now, but we stayed on, and we took the train into the washery where they dumped the coal, and then we headed back down to the pit. And then when we were down in the pit, we were waiting for a while as other trains were leaving the mine and coming up, and the fireman kind of was hinting that we should just get off there and then walk back to June, which is miles away. At that point, our communication really broke down, that we didn't understand what he wanted us to do. We ended up getting a ride back up to the washery, and we got off at the washery again, and June showed up and picked us up, and yeah, that's how the trip kind of came together. But being on that train, it's just pounding the rail and loud, and it was quite the experience.
That was the part that that's my first experience with steam, in the first place, and photographing steam. But the engines pounding and shaking, as Travis is saying, of the cab going down to the mine. Either there were no shock absorbing capability on these old Mikados, or they were frozen solid, but it was absolutely bone rattling down. And both the fireman and the engineer, they looked unfazed. They had these little old soft leather chairs, and they just banged away going down.
Travis, you mentioned that after loading in the mines, the coal was offloaded up at the washery. Where did it go from there?
So when they would get back up to the washery, they would dump the coal off, and then that would go into the plant where they would sort it all out by size. And I know Todd really got into that whole plant and was walking around and kind of watched where all the conveyor belts are going. And I'll probably let him tell that story.
After, as Travis and I were down at the Blue Loader, as was said, the trains pull that several miles up to the washery. So the Mikados pull the loaded coal trains to the upper terminus, again called the washery, where each loaded train car has an intricate series of hydraulic side dumping hinge doors. You'll see these in the photographs that permit the coal to fall through grates to an underground and then overhead conveyor belt system that in turn transfers to aerial flood loaders. The staging overland coal train sets are pulled 2 trains at a time through the flood loaders via automated in-ground motors and pulleys operating each filling train set in opposite directions. Once filled, the diesels are connected and typically depart in the afternoons to all points across mainland China. Again, from an access standpoint at the washery, I very much like industrial and as part of my photography loves, and just the sort of access again into that area, full of character, full of charm. There was a point where I think, Travis, you were at the tail end of the loaders or the transfer area, and I was at the head end. And all of a sudden, they just start to open in those hinge doors and dump coal. And I thought at one point we were going to lose Travis. I lost him visually for about 30 seconds because all of the coal dust. And I think both his leather jacket and my bright green winter coat became instantly pitch black for the rest of the trip, which neither one of us, I think, since we've gotten back, really want to wash that off because of the memories.
Yeah, coal dust coated absolutely everything in Sandling, and like miles from the mine, everything was just completely covered with dust. And another point that I thought was really interesting is the truckloads of coal that were leaving. There would be multiple workers up in each trailer, hand sorting and tossing out the coal and throwing out rocks and everything. And the amount of time they would spend loading those trucks up, and the amount of labor they spent, it was really eye-opening.
You've both mentioned your Chinese guide June several times. Tell me a little bit more about him and what his relationship meant to your trip.
Well, I'll run quick here and Travis chime in. Like I said earlier, it's a great example of how much I think both Travis and I love the CRPA and the networking opportunities that we've begun with this trip and many others that I've had the good fortune to take before and since. And that's where you can find out about just about any railroad or any opportunity around the world by someone or a group of folks from the CRPA that have been there. And in this case, as I pointed out earlier, I blame and thank Mike Valentine in the same breath. And in all seriousness, he introduced us to our guide, June. And June's knowledge of the region and his ability as a photographer himself, a railroad photographer of sorts, to know the seasons and sun angles, as well as the typical day's operation, were invaluable. His network ability for access to the shop and yard masters for the train schedules to the new mine, for example, and his overall hospitality, sharing meals and companionship with us from 5 a.m. to 10 p.m., all typically in weather that was below freezing. We chose early February, just to point out one detail, for our visit because it's the coldest month annually there in Sandling and provides the most dramatic setting for steam.
Yeah, June was amazing. He was always there for us. So when we were at the store, if someone was giving us a high price on something, he would barter for us to get it back down to an acceptable price. And he was also a character. Like he walked around that town like he owned it. And I just remember sitting down at the restaurant that second night or something, and he was popping beer tops off with chopsticks. And he was a real showman. So that was June. He was always there for us. And the other thing that June had, like where Todd said, like he knew where to go and what to do, and he brought us to all the great places for photos. But after a couple days in, June just let us go where we wanted to go, and he didn't hinder us in any way. The trip would have been nothing without June. June was everything to the trip.
I love a couple here. Just a quick side story to that. He would show us areas of the mine and general landscape areas that he had been, over the many years that he's been doing this as a guide. And then, as Travis said, he would say, okay, I'll meet you back here at the car in 3 hours or 4 hours, whatever the time frame we wanted. But every so often, I would walk over to a precipice and be setting up for a photo, and you get that sense that someone's right behind you, and you turn, and there's June looking, what is that? 300 millimeter lens. Of course, I rented that. I don't own one that's $12,000. Oh, 300, never seen. And then he would kid me for the rest of the trip. Oh, that lens weighs 40 pounds. Why do you do that? No, not 300. You need the wide angle for this shot. He would say those kinds of fun things. And I've corresponded, as Travis has, for 2 years now since with him on periodic basis. And he sent me a picture about a year ago and said, I've got a 300, really works good now. So it's sort of a fun... He's learning as we're learning, and it was just a nice way, because he is a photographer, to be able to share different moments, even though we could barely speak either's language.
So you guys have mentioned earlier about making arrangements to get inside the locomotive repair shop, which are, I mean, all of your photographs are incredible, but there are some really, really special views you made inside there. Could you tell me a little bit about visiting inside the shops, what it was like getting in there, and what the experience was like once you were there?
The shops were also high on our list of something that we wanted to capture and visit. And we kept asking June about it. He's like, well, there's no work today, no work today. So we had to it kept getting postponed, and we're getting kind of worried. But it was probably halfway through our time there that we were allowed to go to the shop, and you're escorted in. There's security guards at the gate, and we walked in, and everybody's in their blue helmets and all their safety gear, and like the rest of the railroad, they're pretty casual, but the shops was pretty formal. But before we left the shops, everybody was in their normal gear, and the hard hats were gone, and so it was funny to see the transition. And we were only there for, what do you think, Todd?
Yeah, maybe an hour, hour and a half. Yeah, I think they relaxed when they knew we weren't military police or someone coming in for an inspection. But what's interesting from our research before going, and then actually the experience we had there, it is, as it has been now for the last couple of years, been scheduled to shut down, and then been extended a year and been extended a year. But as recently as 10 years ago, there were 25 active Mikado locomotives working the mine each day. And when we were there were 7 active locomotives, and several, as we saw in the shops, being repaired, but really from parted out carcasses that were laying all around the outside of the shop. So it's sort of a sad transition, but there's only a few running now in decent condition, and the rest are in different variations of non-running or being parted out.
Another thing to note was many of the workers that we saw working and fixing the locomotives and repairing them were also the same people we saw running the trains days earlier. So they definitely had multiple roles, and I guess no one knows those steam locomotives any better than the guys that run them.
And you'll notice in the photographs, or you may notice in the photographs, that almost none of them, with all the blow torches and things going on, are wearing any eye protection. And I think one of the memorable parts of that visit inside the shop, Travis, was the extraordinary, I've never experienced a louder sound set of the pistons and the one Mikado that they had just pounding inside the shop working on it. Never experienced something louder. Probably lost some of my hearing that day, but what a way to lose it.
So, I mean, in a trip that sounds like it was just, packed with memorable moments, were there any that really stood out to each of you?
Getting to know and building a friendship with Travis, sharing tips on photography together, and as mentioned, June's hospitality.
Yeah, it's hard to say that there's only 1 or 2 memories of it, because they're like, this is a whole new world to us. So everything was exciting and interesting. And like Todd said, the smells that really hits home to me. 2 that come to mind is the sparkler train. That's where they run the train in a way to create tons of cinder in the air, and they time it out to do it at nighttime. And they beat the living piss out of these trains as they take them up the hill, and they're just screaming away. And we've all seen pictures of the they call them sparkler trains. So you've all seen pictures of the flume just kicking out flames and sparks hundreds of feet into the air. That was exciting, and we ended up becoming friends with like the locomotive boss or manager, or the engineer manager, and so he helped us run a couple extras that normally someone that goes there doesn't get to see more than 1 or 2. And towards the end of our trip was Chinese New Year. It was really cool because as we were leaving Sandling and flying back into Beijing, as our plane was coming down, there's fireworks going off everywhere, like hundreds of mile radius, and there's thousands of fireworks going off in every single spot of the city. That was impressive to come into Beijing to see.
I did like the sparkler train as well, and the general manager that runs all of the crews. The first, we did that 2 different evenings, but one of the first evening, Scott, the load came up. We're all taking photos, and I thank Travis also for sharing some of his night pan technique, which I quickly mastered because I had to make sure I got the images. And as the train came up and around the bend, the manager on his phone and walkie-talkie calls the engineer and essentially in Chinese says, "Okay, that was okay, but go back down and do it again. I want some more spark." So here we are in the middle of the night, in the middle of the mine, and this train has gone by, and we have the access to it. He backs it down, and he comes back through for yet again another even more spectacular pass. So, small world. Again, June helped us with that, and we're eternally thankful.
Well, boy, what a spectacular adventure, and what incredible photographs you both got out of it. Thank you so much for sharing them with us. Thank you for helping us make it possible to do it in this first ever virtual conference, and for putting this together on a really short time frame to make it happen. It is just an absolute treat to see and to share your work. Can't thank you enough. We'll try to take some questions when we get to the live session. So Todd and Travis, thank you.
Thanks for having us, Scott.